Welcome to Days of Roar, a Detroit Tigers podcast brought to you by the Detroit Free Press. My name is Mark Gorosh. I am here with Free Press beat writer Evan Petzold, fresh off long airplane rides, lots of vacation, and all kinds of things. But Evan, we are ready to get back to it. Old school, the way we do it every week. So happy to have you back, buddy. Got my Michigan State hat on because you know what week this is, don't you?
Yeah, it's a big week, huh? Michigan State. We'll see what happens. I'm glad to be home for it, Mark. Highlights from Greece. He was visiting the Acropolis in Athens, taking a day cruise on a mini yacht in Santorini, cliff jumping in Milos, hanging out at the pink sand beach in Crete. Savannah and I had the time of our lives, but we're both happy to be back home, and I'm happy to be here with you right now, recording Days of Roar, as it should be, as it always is. It feels right. I do have some people to thank, though, before we jump into things. Editors, Ryan Ford, Marlo Alter, Andrew Burkle, columnists, Jeff Seidel, Sean Windsor, Carlos Menares, reporters, Jared Ramsey, Rainer Sabin. Thank you to all of you for the coverage on the Tigers while I was gone. As for the podcast, special thanks to Mark, audio producer Robin Chan, and Tigers radio analyst Bobby L. Scales II. Mark, you got your Michigan State hat on. It's Michigan State, Michigan week. I get it. But there are 156 days until opening day. And just like last offseason, we'll be podcasting every single week this offseason. That is just how we roll around here. And with that being said, for all of our listeners out there, please like, rate, share, and subscribe. If you're listening right now, take 1 minute of your time to rate the podcast, hit 5 stars for us. Leave a quick review, whether you like Mark or you don't like Mark. I need you to give us 5 stars and hit us with a quick review. Won't take more than a minute. We need all the reviews we can get to keep chugging along throughout the offseason. But yeah, Mark, this is how it's supposed to be. You and me every single week. Let's get after it.
Let's get after it. And when you rate, share, subscribe, and comment, just remember, when you're telling everybody how much you don't like me, I'm old. 68 and a half years old. I got a lot of people that don't like me. So you're at the back of the line. But good for you. All right. So let's start talking a little bit about baseball. This week, the World Series begins on Friday. And I'm getting a little tired of them taking like 23 days between the time series end and they start the World Series. It feels like they're starting the World Series after Halloween these days. And it kind of sucks. So they need to hopefully start narrowing the gap on that. But what do you think's going to happen here? The Dodgers beat the Mets. The Yanks beat the Guardians. They beat up the Guardians, but it was a fun series. I think the Tigers obviously tired out their bullpen. Did you get any news about the World Series and the playoff activities over in Greece? And it's not big. Greece is not a big baseball country.
I did see a couple Tigers hats, by the way. I saw 2 of them, and I dropped a couple Go Tigers in Greece. I was not expecting to see that, but I did also saw a Red Sox hat, and then obviously saw the Yankees hats and the Dodgers hats. Those are pretty normal to see everywhere, and it's only fitting that it's Dodgers versus Yankees in the World Series. We're going to have Mike Ferrin, co-host of Power Rally, come on the show in a little bit to discuss the World Series a little bit more, but I love it, man. I love it. Shohei Ohtani, Aaron Judge, like give me all of that. I'm taking it all. And it's going to be an awesome series. I think it's good for baseball to have the 2 biggest superstars playing against each other on the biggest stage. Like there is nothing wrong with that. Say what you want about the fact that these are 2 high payroll teams. I care about the fact that it's Shohei Ohtani versus Aaron Judge, 2 very highly paid players, but rightfully so because they are elite in many, many ways. I love this matchup for that reason in particular. I think that's why a lot of baseball fans are going to be watching this. Yes, interested in the series, interested in what happens, but just to watch Aaron Judge versus Shohei Ohtani, that is something that is going to captivate all audiences. It's going to be a really fun World Series, but we'll dig into more of that with Mike Ferrin.
Yep. Notwithstanding the fact that Clayton Kershaw, or the corpse of Clayton Kershaw's left arm, is not pitching in this series, including him, there will be likely 7 Hall of Famers in this series, 6 active, and you do have arguably the greatest baseball player of all time, Shohei Ohtani. You can argue with me all you want about that, and I will argue back. Also, you have clearly one of the greatest home run hitters of all time in Aaron Judge. Lots of other great players. You have probably the greatest young player of the era, Juan Soto. Should be a lot of fun. And it's a good thing both bullpens have gotten 4 to 5 days of rest before we go back into the new way that strategy has come to baseball, courtesy of one A.J. Hinch. A.J. Hinch changing the paradigm of how they play baseball. We're going to talk a little bit about that later and with Mike Ferrin. But this week, they announced all the candidates to be awarded the Gold Glove at all the various positions, including being a utility player. The Detroit Tigers, Jake Rogers was named an American League finalist for the 2024 Gold Glove at the catcher position, along with Freddie Fermin and Cal Raleigh of the Mariners. And yeah, Freddie Fermin, I didn't really kind of get that one, but God bless him. Notable that Riley Green was not included. I heard some good debates about that as far as how they decide on who will be a Gold Glove finalist, and it just seems like data and statistical evidence is only about 25% of the mix. The other 75% is who you like, who the press and managers and other people in the baseball world think are good defenders with their eyes.
I'm going to cut you off right there because it's actually not the press. So Riley Green, if you're upset that you were not a finalist for Gold Glove, do not come looking at the baseball writers. It's actually the 75% is 30 MLB managers and up to 6 coaches from each team and a pool of players in the individual league. So obviously you have the American League and the National League, excluding players from their own team. So if Riley Green is upset that he is not an American League Gold Glove finalist, which I think he should be, do not look at the writers. Look at players from other teams, managers from other teams, and coaches from other teams, because those are the 75% that selected, the other 25% coming from the SABR Defensive Index. And that's how the finalists are determined. I do think Riley Green was snubbed. I think Riley Green should have been a finalist without a doubt. When you look at, again, Riley Green, plus 14 defensive runs saved in left field. The other three candidates that are finalists, Colton Cowser of the Baltimore Orioles, Stephen Kwan of the Cleveland Guardians, and Alex Verdugo of the New York Yankees. Stephen Kwan didn't play a full season. I still think Stephen Kwan is great in left field, no doubt. Colton Cowser, fantastic rookie season that he's had. Alex Verdugo, though, really? I think Riley Green should have been over Alex Verdugo for sure. I'm not saying that Riley Green deserved to win the Gold Glove for left field, but I do think Riley Green is a better left fielder than Alex Verdugo. Let's get with the program there. Riley Green, though, sneaky good left fielder. Maybe why he got snubbed. Because there was a point in the season where I looked up and he was like plus 10 defensive runs saved. And I said, wow, Riley Green, plus 10 defensive runs saved. He never does anything that concerns you. There are no issues with Riley Green in left field. And he kind of snuck under the radar in that way. It's the same way that, A.J. Hinch talks about this all the time. Like the best way you can compliment a catcher is by saying that you don't notice them behind the plate, because that means that they're rock solid. They're doing all the right things. They're not letting balls get by them. They're calling the right pitches. They're not making mistakes in that way. Riley Green, kind of the same way. Like he's so good in left field that you just don't really notice him out there. And unless he's making his diving plays, of course, but kind of snuck under the radar for me. But again, plus 14 defensive runs saved in left field. Like, come on. Riley Green is a better left fielder than Alex Verdugo. I think he should have been a finalist for sure. But again, Riley Green, do not look at the writers. Look at your peers. As for Jake Rogers, worth plus 13 defensive runs saved, 9 blocks above average, 1 caught stealing above average, 9 framing runs, and had an above average pop time. He also worked behind the plate for all 31 starts of Tarek Skubal's Triple Crown season. I think it might be tough to beat out Cal Raleigh. It was worth 17 defensive runs saved, smacked 34 home runs, and caught for the best starting rotation in baseball. No, offense does not matter, but I do think that sometimes it plays a factor, especially when guys are voting. If you're going to vote the guy who's hit 34 home runs or the guy who's hit like 10 home runs, maybe a little bit more love for the guy who hit 34. I don't love that it is that way, but I do think that that's how it goes sometimes. As for Freddie Fermin of the Kansas City Royals, I did not see that one either. That caught me by surprise, but I think it's going to be a battle between Cal Raleigh, Jake Rogers. I'm really bummed out that Riley Green didn't make it, but as for Jake Rogers, November 3rd on ESPN. That's when we're going to find out if he is a winner or not in that category. But either way, heck of a season from Jake Rogers. Major hat tip to him.
Before we get to Mike Ferrin, let's jump into the big two. Question one of the big two: how do you evaluate the Tigers in these four categories in the 2024 season? Hitting, pitching, defense, and essentially managerial and coaching. So talk to me about the Tigers hitting, Ev.
Yeah, so if C is average, I'm giving the Tigers a B- as an overall grade for the 2024 season. That's an overall grade, B-. Hitting, I have them at a D+. Again, I mean, look, man, the Tigers, they rank 24th among the 30 teams with a .685 OPS. They rank 19th with 4.2 runs per game. I do think there is potential here for a top 15 offense led by Riley Green and Kerry Carpenter, but both of those players missed time with injuries for the second season in a row, including an almost 3-month absence for Carpenter. The batting order had too many holes for most of the season, below average production across the board from catcher, first base, second base, third base, and shortstop positions. The 3 outfield positions and the designated hitter position had above average production. I think the Tigers just need to get on base more often, and they need to create damage more often. Without any of the star power, they relied on pinch hitters to get matchup advantages. And yes, they rank second in all of baseball in pinch hit plate appearances, trailing only the Boston Red Sox. Ranked 5th in batting average for pinch hitters, but 13th in OPS for pinch hitters. Need to see more power out of this Tigers lineup. I think they need to get on base more often. And again, just too many holes up and down. So that's why I hit the hitting with a D+.
All right. And so pitching, I think, speaks for itself. I mean, especially in the second half of the year, you had, one of the top 5 pitching staffs in baseball. You had the number 2 bullpen in baseball. I think pitching is pretty self-explanatory. What I think people need to understand is, they pitched mostly without their starters in the second half, A. And B, when you have seasons where your bullpen is really, really used heavily, often you come to find in the season afterward that there's a lot of fatigue to a lot of these relievers and they don't perform at the same level. So expecting all these players to, especially relievers, to perform at the same level of excellence is going to be pretty difficult in 2025. So, but as far as how, and it should affect how they build their roster for 2025, I think you have to acknowledge that it may be a problem.
Yeah, and that's why I have pitching at an A- for the 2024 season. It's literally Kenta Maeda away from being an A. Had Kenta Maeda been better in the 2024 season. Yeah, you got Tarek Skubal, Triple Crown, leading the American League with 18 wins, a 2.39 ERA, and 228 strikeouts. He's going to win the AL Cy Young Award. The only question is whether or not he wins it unanimously. I think he should. We'll see. He led the Tigers with 192 innings and 31 starts. Pure dominance, best pitcher on the planet. We'll talk more about him in the coming weeks leading up to him winning the AL Cy Young Award in mid-November. But then you look at the Tigers across the board, and it wasn't just Tarek Skubal. Team ERA was 4th in MLB. Starting pitcher ERA, 4th in MLB. Bullpen ERA, 5th in MLB. It was really, really good. The Tigers did across the board. And even more impressively, the opener bulk reliever strategy with only 2 starters for almost the entire final 2 months of the season after trading Jack Flaherty to the Los Angeles Dodgers for Trey Sweeney and Thyron Lorenzo on July 30th. This is Jack Flaherty, a pitcher who's going to be pitching for the Los Angeles Dodgers in the World Series. The Tigers traded him away, and they still found success with an opener bulk reliever strategy. President of Baseball Operations Scott Harris came up with the strategy. Manager AJ Hinch implemented the strategy to perfection. The 2 starters were Tarek Skubal and Kader Montero, but everyone else was an opener, a bulk reliever, or a traditional reliever. And the Tigers ranked 2nd in team ERA at 3.48 from July 30th to the end of the season, which is when they were using that opener bulk reliever strategy. We have to give a shout out to the openers, Bo Brisky, Tyler Holton, Alex Faedo, Brendan Hannafy, and Mason Englert. Shout out to the bulk relievers, Brant Herter, Kenta Maeda, Brian Sammons, and Ty Madden. The playoff push would not have been possible without those guys. Again, most non-local baseball fans wouldn't have any idea who those dudes are aside from Maeda, but Tigers fans know they were impressive and they were integral to the Tigers doing what they did in getting to the playoffs. That's why pitching is at A- for me.
I would say that, not unknown to listeners of Days of Roar, I've often been extremely critical of Scott Harris, but the coordination between A.J. Hinch and Scott Harris on the pitching side this year was nothing less than spectacular. And they deserve kudos, both of them, for what they cooked up, how they implemented it, and how they strategized it. So kudos to them. Let's touch on defense, and I think it's probably one of the most underrated parts of the Detroit Tigers in a positive way. So especially what they were able to roll out there in the second half of the season. And, talk to me a little bit about that. I got a few tidbits I want to share.
For sure. I have the defense at a B-. I thought they got a lot better as the season went along, specifically Spencer Torkelson at first base and Colt Keith at second base, much improved. But the Tigers were tied for fifth in defensive runs saved. They were tied for sixth in outs above average, fourth in catcher framing, thanks to Jake Rogers. They were middle of the pack in double plays. Remember how the Tigers ranked fifth in defensive runs saved? Here's how they got there. 1 from the pitchers, 11 from catchers. Again, thanks Jake Rogers. 3 from first baseman. Spencer Torkelson, by the way, looked a lot better after coming back from AAA Toledo. -2 from second baseman. I think Colt Keith might be able to be a below average second baseman rather than a bad second baseman. He was headed for -10 defensive run save, but he ended up at -6 defensive run save. He definitely improved in the second half of the season. -13 from third baseman. Blame Jace Young, Gio Urshela, Zach McKinstry, and Matt Vierling for that. +5 at shortstop, thanks to Trey Sweeney for saving Javier Baez. +5 from left field. Riley Green was worth 14 defensive runs saved there. 4 in center field. Parker Meadows, the king, the legend, getting it done. +2 in right field. Kerry Carpenter, worth 1 defensive run saved. He is an above average defender. So you had defensive run save leaders, Riley Green, Jake Rogers, Parker Meadows, Andy Ibanez, Trey Sweeney. Torkelson, worth +2 defensive runs saved at first base for the season. Again, I thought he was much improved after coming back from Toledo. The outfield defense was incredible. And I think the infield defense still has room to improve. I think Colt Keith can get even better. Hopefully, we'll see what happens at first base. Spencer Torkelson obviously has a long history of being a bad defender at first, but he came back and he was a lot better. It's really third base that had me concerned, and that's the big blemish. -13 defensive run saved from third baseman Jace Young, worth -6 defensive run saved in limited opportunities. Matt Vierling was below average. Zach McKinstry was below average. Gio Urshela, who the Tigers moved on from, below average. If they would have been better at third base, I think that infield defense would have been a lot better. And if Colt Keith would have looked more comfortable early in the season, I think that would have benefited them as well. But I have met a B-. The outfield defense was incredible. It's so much different with Parker Meadows out there roaming center field, but B- for me for the Tigers defense.
All right. Lastly, you think A.J. Hinch should win the AL Manager of the Year?
I mean, look, I think he deserves the award for leading the youngest team in baseball to the postseason. He probably won't win the award because of Cleveland Guardians manager Stephen Vogt and Kansas City Royals manager Matt Quatraro. They seem like the front runners, but regardless, Hinch should receive plenty of votes from the baseball writers. And I think he could finish top 3 for the first time since 2017, back when he managed the Houston Astros. All 3 of those managers I mentioned, they've reached the postseason, but Hinch did not have as much established talent to work with. He pushed all the right buttons while staying consistent in his messaging to players throughout the season. The players bought into everything Hinch preached, including the chess match with pinch hitters and the unorthodox pitching strategy with openers and bulk relievers. Basically, Hinch did more with less. And he also hired the right guys. Pitching coaches Chris Fetter, Robin Lund, Juan Nieves, they worked miracles with AAA pitchers, and they fixed Jack Flaherty. Hitting coaches Michael Bredar, Keith Beauregard, and Lance Zawadski, they provided team and individual game plans to attack opponents. And again, I think the offense could have been a lot better this year, but I do think it was improved in their ability to find a game plan, stick to a game plan, and execute a game plan. And also, third base coach Joey Cora, he created runs with his ultra-aggressive sends. Those were a little bit obnoxious at the beginning of the season, but A.J. Hinch said, trust me, stick with this guy. It's going to pay off in the long run. And Joey Cora ended up creating a ton of runs, late in the season. That's what he did. So A.J. Hinch hired the right people around him. Should he win Manager of the Year in the American League? I think so. Will he? I don't think so. But again, he had a hell of a year, and that's why coaching gets an A for me.
Look, AJ's probably not winning the manager of the year. I mean, Kansas City lost 106 games last year. So at the end of the day, though, here's the real question. Who's the best manager in the American League? And when you ask it that way, I think the answer is without any question, AJ Hinch. Awards are nice, but I'd rather have the best manager in the American League than the guy that won the award. All right. Question 2 of the big 2. Is Kerry Carpenter underrated, or does he just need to stay healthy for 500 major league at-bats in a season for people to see really what Kerry Carpenter is?
I love this question because I was doing some research on Kerry Carpenter, and he is an elite hitter against right-handed pitchers. Carpenter being a left-handed hitter against right-handed pitchers, his OPS against righties, it ranks 12th among 241 hitters with at least 700 plate appearances in those situations from 2022 to 2024, which spans the entirety of Kerry Carpenter's MLB career. Since he got in the big leagues, he is the 12th best hitter against right-handed pitchers. I think Kerry Carpenter is extremely underrated and he needs to stay healthy. Like, the Tigers began their improbable run to the postseason on August 11th. Is it any surprise that Kerry Carpenter returned August 13th from the injured list following a near 3-month absence with a lumbar spine stress fracture? He led the offense in that playoff push. 10 home runs, a 954 OPS in his final 37 games, 10 homers in his final 37 games. His isolated power ranked 4th and his OPS ranked 5th among 188 hitters with at least 130 plate appearances since August 11th. I mean, come on now. Among that group, I mean, look, he trailed only Aaron Judge, Shohei Ohtani, and Francisco Lindor in the power production department during that stretch from August 11th to the end of the season when he came back August 13th from the injured list. I think Kerry Carpenter is criminally underrated. And if he can just stay healthy, again, he got the shoulder injury that he had in 2023, and then he had the back injury in 2024. Kerry Carpenter is a legit dude. He's one of the, again, throughout his entire big league career, one of the best in baseball against right-handed pitchers. Throw it out against lefties. Don't use him. I don't care. He's going to face righties 90% of the time, and this guy is an elite hitter against right-handed pitchers. I think he's criminally underrated. What do you think, Mark?
I think anybody with an OPS over 900 is an amazing, hitter in the major leagues. They do tons and tons of damage. And to give people a little math that love to whine about the idea that he should be facing left-handed pitching, understand this. Kerry Carpenter, a left-hand hitter faces left-handed pitchers, if they face them every time, about 150 at-bats a year. AJ usually gives Carpenter about 60 at-bats against left-handed pitching. So what are you missing? You're missing a guy who really struggles to hit left-handers about 90 at-bats a year where he doesn't hit well. So you're really not missing very much. And again, I think there was only 4, maybe 5 hitters in the major leagues this year that had an OPS over 900. So Kerry Carpenter, a banger. The boy can really, really rake. And kind of underappreciated still. Eager to see what happens next year. I think we're going to get the big breakout if we can keep him healthy for an entire season and get him 500 at-bats. All right. We'll be back in 60 with the smartest man in baseball talking, Mike Ferrin.
All right, I'd like to welcome Mike Ferrin, co-host of Power Alley on MLB Network Radio, to the Days of Roar podcast. We're going to be talking about the Tigers' postseason run, the World Series between the Los Angeles Dodgers and the New York Yankees, and a couple potential fits for the Tigers in free agency. Mike, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure, guys. It's great to be back. What a crazy run. Like, the last time I was on the podcast, I don't think any of us could have envisioned the season ending like this for the Tigers. So.
Well, the Tigers went on a 31-11 run beginning August 11th to make the postseason. What did you see watching from afar? Because obviously there was AJ Hinch's chess match with the pinch hitters, the pitching strategy of openers and bulk relievers. You had the Cy Young dominance of Tarek Skubal, the success of Parker Meadows after the swing change in AAA Toledo. Kerry Carpenter returns after missing almost 3 months with a broken back. Like, where were you at with all of this? What did you see as you watched the run unfold?
I mean, I don't think it's a surprise that they got better once the offense got healthier, right? I mean, it was Green and Carpenter coming back. As much as we've talked about the bullpen machinations and how expertly they handled like only having 2 starting pitchers for a good chunk of the month of August, that the big issue that they had was that their offense wasn't very good. And when I was in there at the end of July, it was right after Green had gone on the IL, and you could tell that was, that homestand, they were 3-7 against Kansas City, Minnesota, and Cleveland, and you could just tell that there wasn't enough offense. Bly Madris did a nice job, but Bly Madris is kind of an up and down guy, right? And it's that you're losing that thump. So once they got those 2 guys back, it made the offense more credible. And I thought, okay, well, this will be a solid finish to the season. Then add in the way the bullpen pitch, the production that they got out of guys like Gunther and Hannafy, and I think one of the unsung moments of the season was, what was it? The Brian Simmons comes up, right? And they use an opener with him, and he gives them 7 1/3 innings, right? Even though they weren't, I think they lost that game, right? And he may have given up 4 or 5 runs in the process. The fact that he gave them 7, was huge at a time when they weren't getting 7 innings out of anybody, right? And it probably helped to reset that pen a little bit. But, Tyler Holton was unbelievable. Jason Foley having a better second half. Bo Brisky, finally feeling like his arm was in a spot where he could let it rip. I think Bo Brisky is really good. I think he is a real quality major league reliever and can pitch at the back end of games. I think that you saw just some of their players take a step forward, and I think that they, they got more credible offensive contributions out of a couple of spots, right? And Javi Baez obviously had a disappointing year, and not that Trey Sweeney was great, but he was good enough that it upgraded that position, and the bottom of the lineup got a little better. So, there were a lot of different things that I think went into it, and they probably had a little bit of luck on their side too, which you need when you've got 501 odds in the middle of August to make the playoffs. So it was a great story. It was a great run. It was so much fun to watch. That division series against Cleveland was sensational. I mean, the games were great. Game 4 in particular was really good. I know it was a heartbreaker for Tigers fans, but I think you walk into this offseason feeling really, really good. And I'll go back to something I was talking to some Tigers people about in July. It was just what came up was that you just want to win. It's been so long. You just think even a winning record. So, but it really is a great thing, and it certainly points them in a better direction going into this winter.
Mike, talk about how there's almost some irony in it, but how about David Fry off Brisky? I'm not a bad pitch, right, by the way, bottom rail, and then he turns around and does it again in the next series. I almost felt relieved when Cleveland did to New York what Cleveland had done to Detroit. I mean, and then, obviously, first ball fanatic Lane Thomas, and also not a terrible pitch from Tarek Skubal, goes grand slam. Just, here you are, essentially 5 outs away from 5 outs away from advancing, and then the next thing you know, you're home.
Yeah. I mean, that's the nature of playoff baseball, right? Is that you have to get all 27 outs in that case in 3 wins. And yeah, it's heartbreaking. But I mean, listen, Thomas had a really rough August after he got traded to Cleveland and then turned it up. And he's been a guy that's mashed lefties in his career. He's been okay to not so good against righties, but against lefties, he's absolutely destroyed them. And, that the inning kind of unraveled on them in a weird way, and in a way that we hadn't seen a Skubal inning unravel in a couple of months. And sometimes it's just, bad luck also can show up at the worst possible times. Brisky doesn't get hit for, most of the last 2 months of the season. And, Fry puts a good swing on him and, nearly wins free pizzas for everybody. I mean, he really hit it through the whole of the Little Caesars ad. So it's just, I don't know that I can make much of it other than saying sometimes guys put good swings on the ball, and sometimes it's not like, Fry, I know didn't have a great second half, but he had a great first half, and he's a credible major league bat, and he was an all-star this year. And, it's not like there's a ton of power in that Cleveland lineup, but they got him at the right times. And, I think the Tigers losing that series, despite holding Jose Ramirez in check the way that they did, was probably a little bit bitter. But at the same time, we knew that neither of those offenses were great and that it was going to be low-scoring games for the most part and that it was going to be a big blast that, could turn the tide. And that was the case really in Game 1 and Game 5, right? I mean, Thomas hits a 3-run homer in the first inning of Game 1 that put it out of reach, and then the grand slam was just too much for the Tigers to come back from.
Yeah, and Lane Thomas is not getting invited to dinner at the Gorosh house, I can tell you that. I want to ask you something because, listen, you are the Aaron Judge of baseball talkers, and your analytical abilities of understanding
maybe playoff Aaron
transition.
Postseason.
I don't know about that. Yeah, playoff Aaron Judge had some bombs last series, so I mean, maybe that's not a bad thing. But I want to ask you because the AJ Hinch, I call him the puppet master, but the mixing and matching, the maximizing leverage, the using bullpen. I mean, Tampa Bay has done this for various times for years, but I think AJ took it to another level for a really, really long period of time and in a much more frequent way than Tampa almost had ever done it. And I'm kind of curious because it's now seemingly seeped into the strategic, premise of what other really good teams are doing. I mean, bullpen games are now kind of the vogue in the playoffs. And I'm curious, do you think that'll seep into 2025? And give me your thoughts on it because obviously we're seeing some of the downside of it too.
Yeah. So, I mean, a couple things. I don't know that I think AJ used it more prominently than Tampa did when they first started deploying an opener strategy, because that Tampa team, that would have been like 2019. I think that team was good, but I don't think they were in the race, right? It was either 2018 or 2019. So like Ryan Yarborough ended up in, I realize we have discounted pitcher wins, but he threw a ton of innings without many starts. And I think had like a 15-win season, basically as their bulk guy. And that was a good Tampa team, but they weren't doing it in the midst of a pennant race, right? And I think the other part of this is that it's not a strategy that anybody prefers to deploy. It's one that they have to deploy based on the situation that their pitching is in. And post-COVID, we have seen this kind of being more of an issue for playoff teams. 2021, the Braves, because of injuries they had, and then, in the World Series, Charlie Morton breaking his leg, had to deploy a bullpen game in, I think it was Game 4 of the World Series, a game that they eventually won. Kyle Wright was actually really good out of their bullpen that day as kind of the bulk guy. We saw the Diamondbacks have to do that as a strategy in Game 4 of both the League Championship Series and the World Series. I remember how people were so angry about it last year that they would have to do that. But they didn't have another option. Like, they had made it through the season basically with 2 starting pitchers, and then Brandon Pfaadt started to put it together at the end of the year. And so, like, what are you going to do? I just got done covering the National League Championship Series. The Dodgers don't have 4 starting pitchers. They don't. They have to use a bullpen game, and they're further limited by the fact that Yoshinobu Yamamoto has to basically pitch on the 6th day, right? Or on the 7th day. Like, he needs the extra rest. I'm really curious, as an aside, how they line up their World Series rotation, because theoretically you could put him in Game 2 and then Game 6 with 5 days of rest in between, and he would get to start twice. But they didn't have that luxury in this last round. They had to bullpen twice because they did not have starting pitchers. So I think all of these are born of necessity, because you don't have enough starting pitching depth because of injury or you just don't have enough arms in the organization. In the Dodgers case, they have 8 starting pitchers that are on the injured list. Brent Honeywell, who was kind of I thought the unsung hero of the Dodgers running the NLCS because he soaked up innings in Game 2 and Game 6, was only on the roster because Michael Grove got hurt in the division series, who had been one of the Dodgers, kind of fringe starters over the course of the year. So I don't know that it's a strategy that anybody wants to employ. I do think that AJ did it the best that he could over the course of the year, in the same way that Kevin Cash did back when he was having to employ the strategy regularly, which is you've got a plan, where the pockets are that you want to use your relievers. You're not going to let the results on the field dictate as much as the previous plan, because you just don't have that luxury when you have guys that are only capable of getting 4 and 5 outs or going 30 some odd pitches. And so I think that's what you saw was that he was able to do that. He was able to create softer landings for guys that, had struggled, especially early in the game. I think Tanner Montero was a great example of that, right? So like his was probably more a strategy closer to Tampa Bay's, whereas the Dodgers were more, especially in the division series, were more a strategy of we're just going to have to use all our relievers today. And that was the way that it worked. And sometimes it's, that was the case in some of the games for the Tigers too. So again, like it's not something that anybody really wants. It's not something that anybody desires to have. But I don't know if this is still a remnant of COVID or if some of it's a remnant of the reduced number of players in the domestic farm systems or the reduced affiliates or the 2020 draft. But the starting pitching is at a bigger premium at the major league level than it ever has been. And I'm talking to scouts this year. A number of them had very few starting pitcher future grades on pitchers in the minors too. And so I think a lot of it is that the development path is a lot faster. And your goal at the big league level is like, you're not adjudicated on anything other than wins and losses, right? So you have to find a way to win with what you have. And that's the situation the Tigers found themselves in. That's what the Dodgers have found themselves in. It's not a strategy anybody wants to do, but it's the most effective. You've got to find a way to win the games that are in front of you. And that's how they did it. I think what was interesting about the Dodgers, by the way, too, was that in those two bullpen games, or at least two of the games that they ended up having, and one of them wasn't a bullpen game, it was just Jack Flaherty didn't pitch well, that they recognized early on in the game that they weren't going to win, and they saved their A relievers to get them rest. And that, I think, that's a very uncomfortable strategy, I think, for teams in general. It's an uncomfortable one for me because you should be trying to win every game, right? Like you should do, what are you going to do in the postseason? You only get so many bites at the apple. What are you going to do to try and win on this given day, right? And where you're in a position where you have to go to your C-level guys or decide to, in an effort to give you a chance to better win one of the next two, takes a lot of guts. I mean, again, like this is to kind of paraphrase Dusty Baker. He said, your goal isn't to win every game, it's to win the most games. Your goal in a series like that is to win 4 games. You don't have to win every single one. You just have to win 4 out of 7. It shows a lot of confidence in your team. It also is a very uncomfortable spot to be in. And it worked out really well for LA. But I mean, there were some moments where it's like, man, could you have gone to somebody a little earlier to keep this closer? And in the end, it worked out great for them.
The Tigers have already come out and said, too, that they're planning to have a traditional 5-man rotation coming out of spring training going into 2025 opening day. But it is nice to know that they do have that in their back pocket, that if they need to implement the opener/bulk reliever strategy, which is a little bit different than a bullpen only game, they have that in their back pocket with some of their depth pieces. But I want to ask you about the offseason. From your evaluations, what do you think the Tigers need to do in the offseason? I was going to say, you kind of crushed them. No, you crushed them for not adding offense last offseason, and it turns out the Tigers ranked 24th in OPS. It makes you wonder, what a JD Martinez type player would have done for the Tigers in the absence of Kerry Carpenter for most of the summer. But Scott Harris has talked about adding more pitching, probably another Jack Flaherty, Michael Lorenzen type starter, and then finding a right-handed bat. But where are you at with them heading into the offseason? What do they need to do?
I mean, I think the strategy, to me, I don't think that the much changes from what they needed to do last season, right? I think the questions are still the same about their offense. I think you have a little bit better idea on Kerry Carpenter. And you guys know I've been a big Kerry Carpenter fan anyway. But Carpenter and Green are your 2 offensive stalwarts. Parker Meadows' swing changes are interesting. Even if Parker Meadows is a down lineup player, he's an everyday outfield to me because his defense at center field is so good. So, and Matt Vierling is if the Tigers make the playoffs next year, should not be hitting third. You know what I mean? It's, again, another player I'm a big fan of. I think he does so many things to help you win games. I think he is a winning ball player, 100%. But I think he's a guy that probably has to hit, lower in the lineup. Colt Keith, I think, is going to be better next year. That'll help. But the positions, and we could talk about the idea of blocking prospects and all that, but I don't know that the Tigers have in any of their young position players a guy that you look at and go, man, that guy can't be blocked. There's not a future superstar, it doesn't feel like, in that group. And so if you have a chance to upgrade at first, at short, at third, at a corner in the outfield, at catcher, any of those 5 spots, and you probably need to upgrade multiple spots, I think that gives you a better chance going into next year. I think they could use some right-handed balance, and I know they love the young players, and like Jace Young's got a chance to be a pretty good player, and Trey Sweeney did a nice job. I don't know that he's an everyday shortstop in the big leagues, but they obviously could get more production out of the catcher spot, or the Jake Rogers is a really good defender. Like, there's all these things that come about. And like, we don't know what you're going to get out of Spencer Torkelson. I don't think that it's, I don't think there were a whole lot of answers to the question once he came back from AAA. So as far as I'm concerned, let those young players try and prove themselves more in the minor leagues and compete at the big league level, and take what financial resources you have and upgrade the offense. I don't think they're going to end up in the mix for a guy like this, but like Anthony Santander is going to fit a lot of offenses, right? But like, he's going to be a big name in free agency for a number of teams. Switch hitter, can play a corner in the outfield, 40 home run season this year, 30 homer season a year ago. He's a good player, doesn't walk a ton, but teammates think he's a very cerebral hitter too. Players like that should be at the forefront. They need another hairy-chested dude in the middle of the lineup to go with Green and with Carpenter. And if they can find one from the right side, either via trade or via free agency, that'll help. But they shouldn't be afraid to try and upgrade as many as 5 of their offensive spots if they want to compete for a World Series.
So I do have 3 free agent names for you that I want to ask about. But first, we have to dig into this World Series matchup. Los Angeles Dodgers, New York Yankees are the best team in baseball. Dodgers won the most games in the National League. The Yankees won the most games in the American League. World Series begins October 25th. Game 7, if needed, is scheduled for November 2nd. What do you think about this World Series matchup, Dodgers versus Yankees?
Well, I think for casual fans, for ones who don't have, first of all, there's a lot of Yankee and Dodger haters out there, right? Like, they're going to tune into this series. I was thinking about this morning. It's like, if you've seen the movie Private Parts, right? Where they're going through the ratings for Howard Stern, and it's like the Stern haters listen longer than the Stern lovers, right? I think it's kind of what you're going to see with this World Series. And there are a lot of people that are going to tune in to root against one of those two teams. But I think from a star power standpoint, I don't know that you could do much better. I mean, Ohtani versus Judge is the top line. And then with special guests, Juan Soto, Garrett Cole, Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman, right? And then you start getting into Giancarlo Stanton and Max Muncy and some of these incredible names from, Giancarlo Stanton has an MVP award and was runner-up by 2 votes the other time, right? There was a runner-up. I think, he won by 2 votes. The other year, he should have won, but he got hit in the face by Mike Fire's fastball, and it cost him the last month of the year, right? So, you're talking about, just from a casual fan standpoint, the biggest stars in the game are going to be competing. I also think, as a baseball historian, it's kind of cool. It's been 43 years since we've seen a Dodger-Yankee World Series. This will be the 12th time they've met, right? I think it's the 4th time since the Dodgers moved to LA, right? 77, 78, 81, and this. But this was, through the 50s in particular, this was an annual occurrence when they were both still in New York, when it was still a Subway Series. Nobody has more pennants in the National League than the Dodgers, 25. Nobody has more pennants in the American League than the Yankees, 41. So there's a ton of baseball history that's at play. You've got an iconic venue in Dodger Stadium. And so I think that just from an overall standpoint, if you don't have strong feelings either way about these teams, but you're even a casual fan of baseball, I think it's really interesting because you have these 2 name brands who happen to have some of the biggest stars in the game, and it's something that we haven't seen in 2 generations.
I don't know if they've ever had a World Series where there's 7 future Hall of Famers that are on these 2 teams, obviously minus Kershaw, so 6 will be playing. So, if you love baseball, and even if you're just a casual baseball fan, it's hard not to want to watch this series, to say the least. And as you said, Giancarlo Stanton, the playoffs he's having, one day he'll be sitting at home when he thinks back upon his career, and holy smokes, what a way to cap it with this particular playoff. How many times can he come up big and save the Yankees, and it's been pretty unbelievable, to say the least.
Yeah. His postseason for his career has actually been really, really good. He's been an excellent postseason performer. I think in part because if you make a mistake, he gets it out of the ballpark. I mean, he's coming home, right? Like, I think this is another part of it that's kind of an aside, is that there are a number of Southern California players that are in this series that kind of grew up in the shadows of Dodger Stadium. And one of them is Stanton. Garrett Cole is another. Jack Flaherty obviously went to Harvard Westlake, and will pitch one of the first couple of games for the Dodgers. So that's kind of another added part of it. I mean, Stanton hit one of the most memorable home runs in Dodger Stadium history. If you remember, he hit it out of Dodger Stadium in left center field when he was with the Marlins. So like this is, I think the fact that he has sprung to life has been big because Judge has just been okay. Postseason. Soto's been on base a ton. The Yankees have needed somebody other than those two to help carry them, and they've gotten that from them. And while the top of the Dodgers, Freddie Freeman really has been compromised by the ankle, and I'm curious to see what it looks like in the World Series with a few more days off. He didn't start in Game 6, and it'll be basically a week between games for him. I have to think that's going to help some, but that's an Ohtani. They didn't win the hardware at the end of that series, but they had huge moments in it, and like, you love to see the superstars playing well going into this. That's going to be fun, too.
The Dodgers and the Yankees historically have been the highest spenders. Do you think that's good for baseball?
Yeah, I think so. This is where I probably get in trouble with the league some on it. It's like, I think we have erred too far in giving credit to mid and small market owners for not dipping into their own pockets to try and win. Like, this is supposed to be a luxury item, right? It's not like, if you need another coat of gloss on the deck of your yacht, you just go ahead and pay for it. And that's kind of what star players should be, I think.
I love that.
For this, as opposed to a money-making, as a huge money-making venture. So I think to some degree, everybody acting like Uncle Moneypenny from Monopoly with their pockets out and saying we're poor doesn't really resonate with me. I don't tend to believe billionaires when they tell me they don't have any money. So, maybe the reason they're billionaires is because they keep their money. They're probably a lot smarter about spending than like I am, who just spent, like $80 on Amazon for crap. But like I think like in terms of, is it good? Like, hopefully it motivates other teams to spend a little bit. I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. It's also like, and I was actually talking to somebody who's a friend of mine with a small market team, with a very small market team, who was concerned about this yesterday. And he was like, we never have a big payroll. I'm like, gosh, can we even compete? And I'm like, man, this is the first time it's happened in 43 years, right? Like the number 6 seed has made the National League Championship Series or World Series in the NL all 3 seasons. And I get this year that the number 6 seed happened to be the high-spending Mets, who weren't supposed to make the playoffs. They were in a transition year, right? And they made it to the LCS. So, like, I think some of it is just kind of like I think we're so conditioned to worry about payroll because it's a non-cap sport. And the truth of the matter is that this playoff format makes it more fair for the smaller market teams that are involved, because luck plays a disproportionate factor. Last year, we had the Arizona Diamondbacks in the World Series, right? An 84-win team that got outscored over the course of the season. Just win your games in the tournament. All you have to do is finish in the top 40% of your league to make the postseason, right? Like, that's all you need to do. You have to be one of the top 40% of teams. That's insane. If you think about it, for years, we grew up with, before Mark grew up with, one team out of 10 making the postseason, right? Like one in each league. And then it was 2 out of 12 and 2 out of 14, right? Like, think about that. 1/7 of the league, 1/6 of the league making the playoffs. Now we have 40% of it. So I think a lot of that complaining is defending owners that aren't willing to invest in their product. And I think it's super important for them to invest in it now, with everything that's gone on with the RSNs and the changing television landscape. You need to get butts in the seats. You need to put together an entertaining product, and you have to give your fans hope for winning. And there's a better chance to do that because so many teams make the playoffs, and we have seen enough teams that have made it now in this format prove that all you have to do is get in the dance and you have a legitimate chance of going to the World Series.
Well, it's no surprise that you go look at Dodger Stadium, you go look at Yankee Stadium, and there are a lot of butts in those seats, and it's no surprise that those are the teams that hand over the blank checks.
Let me tell you too, like this is, I just want to share this with you because this was really cool. So I did the NLCS for Sirius. And so part of it is we're on the field after the last out, right? And so we walk down on the field, we're doing our, kind of like they're describing the celebration and, like the 3 levels of stands at Dodger Stadium. You guys have both been to Dodger Stadium, right? Like Dodger Stadium is really cool. It's still an unbelievably cool venue, right? Like it is, if you are into mid-century modern architecture, like Dodger Stadium is your place, right? And everything about it is mid-mod. But turning around and looking at those 3 levels of stands behind home plate, filled with people going nuts for the Dodgers clinching the pennant at home. They hadn't done that since 1988. Was unbelievably cool. I mean, it was like this sea, like it wasn't like a sea. It was like 3 large walls of people that were just going nuts. 52,000 there that night. That was that of all the things that happened in that National League Championship Series. That's the memory I'll take away from it. Was looking at that.
I feel the same way about the Tigers clinching the playoffs. Like right after they won, I went down on the field and to turn around and look, and again, you see all those fans. It's different, man. It is different. Like that cool. Is like, it still gives me the chills. But all right, Mike, who do you think's going to win, right? You got Dodgers, you got Yankees. You have the Dodgers. They have this dynamic offense, a lot of length, headlined by Ohtani and Betts. The injuries have impacted the starting rotation, but the bullpen's been incredible. That's helped them survive. With the Yankees, it's the Juan Soto, Aaron Judge show. They're dangerous. Then you got Gleyber Torres, Giancarlo Stanton, Garrett Cole leading the pitching staff. I think you need the pitchers at their best if you really want to win for the Yankees. But for you, when you look at it, why do you think the Dodgers can win? Why do you think the Yankees can win? And who do you think actually wins?
So I think the Dodgers can win because of their offense. And I think it's just, you're going to have to likely navigate 3 Hall of Famers at the top of that lineup. And I just think that's really difficult. We have seen times, like last year in the playoffs, and it was just 3 games, but Betts and Freeman went cold. And I know Freeman has been compromised, but both Betts and Ohtani swinging the bat fairly well. I think it is really difficult to navigate the Dodgers lineup. And I think the other part that they do incredibly well is they don't chase. The most underrated guy in the Dodgers lineup is Max Muncy. When Muncy came back from injury, it changed the complexion of their lineup. Because Max Muncy, like he had a stretch where he reached base safely in 12 consecutive plate appearances in this LCS, which is a record. 8 walks, 4 hits, 2 of them were homers. He just doesn't chase. And that puts so much strain on the pitching staff. And it's every at bat. This guy never gives away an at bat. They're deep enough on the offensive side that, like Will Smith, who didn't have a great second half, their all-star catcher was hitting 8th in Game 6. So I think the Dodgers offense is the number one reason why they can win. I think the Yankees being able to run out 4 credible starters in this, and I think having, it sounds like Nestor Cortez is going to be on their World Series roster. If that's the case, it could potentially give them Cortez, Tim Hill, and Tim Meza to be able to give them opportunities to match up against the Dodgers lefties, which I think gives them a little bit more of an advantage than other teams have had. The Mets had 1 lefty in their bullpen, Danny Young, who they didn't really trust in those big situations, right? Like David Peterson was the other guy, but he ended up starting Game 5 and pitched in bulk in Game 1. So I think that's one of the keys for them, is that they have to get innings out of their starters, because their bullpen did look a little shakier than what we've seen, right? Holmes had finished the season really strong. He didn't have a great LCS. Luke Weaver gave up a couple of home runs. Like, that's not something that Luke Weaver had done in a long time, right? So I think those are the kind of key spots that I look at with both of them. I think the Dodgers offense is significantly better than the Yankees, and I think because they're deeper, and I think that the pitching, because you can't just look at the starters. I don't think that makes any sense to just look at the starting pitching. I think the Dodgers pitching is deeper than what New York's is. So I think the Dodgers, if I have to pick, but look, now that I've said that, the Yankees are going to win the World Series, because I will tell you, I am terrible at predictions. It's one of those things where it's like, I've been so bad that back in a previous life when I used to cover all sports and we would do like March Madness pools, I lost to a coin flip one year. Like, we flipped a coin on each round and the coin beat me in the pool. So do not trust what I say at the end.
Yeah. Mike, I want to ask you a little nuanced question is, they've been starting, we've never really had to address reliever fatigue, A, and B, hitters seeing relievers for the third and fourth time in a series. And, I think all of us that do a lot of data diving understand the third time through the order penalty. But now we've kind of emerged with a new penalty, which is third time you see the reliever in a series penalty. And I think Luke Weaver, of anybody, really suffered from that one in the last series. And I'm kind of curious how, with everyone going so aggressively to, full bullpen type games and really going to relievers so aggressively, how you've seen that impact some of these, playoff series.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I think it's one of the few points that John Smoltz has brought up this postseason that I think is really worth diving into, because the third time through the order penalty for starters is not new. I'll use Smoltz as an example in this just because he's been prominent in it. But Smoltz was a very good starting pitcher he's in the Hall of Fame, right? But every time through the order, he got progressively worse and was 10% worse his third time through than he was the second time for his career. The difference was that the relievers that the Braves had available to them were not better than John Smoltz going through the order the third time, right? And so what we've seen is, with more emphasis on power relievers, that those options are better than most starting pitchers. They're not better than Tarik Skubal. They might not be better than John Smoltz was, in terms of what the options were. Those elite level starters are still important there, but that's where the relievers come in. And you're right that there is research to show that the more familiar a hitter gets with reliever over the course of the series, the better chance they have at success. Now, Mike Petriello wrote about it today at MLB.com and said that it hasn't played out that way this postseason. But that's, as we're going to dive into data, we know that that's small sample size compared to what we have historically. I really first noticed it or paid close attention to it in 2021 when Jose Alvarado for the Phillies kept facing the same pocket of hitters over and over again in the Astros lineup. He was going to face Jordan Alvarez. And as you watched Alvarez's at-bats, go back and just I think he probably faced him 5 times in 6 games of that series. Go back and watch Alvarez's at-bats and see how much better they get throughout. And the last time he faced him, Alvarez hit a game-winning home run over the batter's eye in straightaway center field at Minute Maid Park. That is still one of the most impressive postseason clouds you will ever see. So I think it is something that you have to be mindful of. I think it's something that, the guy who did the research on that, Cameron Grove, who you may remember the old pitching bot Twitter account, he's actually employed by Cleveland now. Ben Lindbergh had pointed that out, I think, in an article a year ago about this. And so you may have noticed that some of their pitcher usage could have been a little bit different. I think it is something that you have to be mindful of in terms of how often you're going to let them relievers face. But I also think, just like there are outliers with starters, there are outliers with relievers. So, I think, to me, the best relief pitcher who's pitched in this postseason is probably Cade Smith. I don't think it matters who Cade Smith faces, right? That guy, let him face the same part of the lineup 10 days in a row, and it's not going to matter because you're still not going to be able to pick up his fastball, right? So, I think there are always going to be outliers to it. Your job is to know who the outliers are, and then your other job is to plan to ensure that you're not getting overexposure. The Dodgers did a terrific job of that. I think in the first 5 games of the LCS, Blake Treinen only faced Francisco Lindor among the top hitters in the Mets lineup. And so think about that. If that had been closer in Game 6, or if it had been close in Game 7, you had your best reliever ready to face the heart of the order because they hadn't seen it. And so I think that it is something that certainly looks like it's been on the Dodgers' mind. And I'm sure it's something that the Yankees will talk about too. I think the problem is the Yankees maybe have a little bit, the branches on the trust tree are a little shorter with the Yankees right now than they have been. Mark Leiter Jr. may have found his way in with that incredible performance that he put in the last 2 games of that series, but I think it's a little different there than maybe it is with LA. And if you have fewer options to go to, you still got to match up your best against the best.
I promised you and our listeners some free agent names. Christian Walker, you know him well. What can you tell me about him as a player, as a teammate, as a person, and as a potential target for the Tigers?
I mean, I've known Walk for years, and Christian Walker, I think, still holds the record for most RBIs in the College World Series. He went 3 times with South Carolina. So this guy's been a run producer since he was a freshman in college, right? Tremendous defensive player. And he has willed himself to that. He was I don't think he would mind me saying this. He was a terrible defensive first baseman in the minor leagues when he was in the Baltimore system. He is now, I think, the best. I think he's one of the better throwing first basemen. He is exceptionally rangy. He has real power. He puts together good competitive at-bats. I do think there are times when things aren't going well for him where his body language shows you that it's not going well for him. And so that can get a little frustrating to watch from time to time, but it's because he cares. He has done a lot of work to reshape himself physically over the last half dozen years. I think he's going to be a highly sought-after free agent. I mean, Pete Alonso is going to be the big name at first base. And Christian Walker, because he's a little bit older at 32, is going to have a little bit lower price tag, and so there's going to be more teams that are involved. But he is a really good defender who hits the ball very, very hard and knows the strike zone, doesn't chase, does all the things that you want. And he can make he's one of the few first basemen that can really make your infield defense better. He'd be, I think, a great fit there because a lot of his power really comes to the pull side. He's at his best when he's using right center field, but more for doubles than home runs. I think he'd be a great fit in Detroit, but I think there's probably about 20 teams that feel that way about him.
Well, I got 3 names for you: Christian Walker, Anthony Santander, and Alex Bregman. You know what this Tigers team needs.
Yeah.
Looking at first base, looking at third base, maybe corner outfield, but the right-handed bat, they need it. Those are 3 names. If you had to pick one of those 3 players for the Tigers in free agency, I'm not asking you to pick the best player, but I'm asking you to pick the one that fits best.
Alex Bregman, without a doubt, is a culture changer. I think the investment in Bregman, in terms of production, Santander and Walker are a little bit older, so maybe there's more there production-wise. I think the number that Bregman gets may surprise some people based on the fact that he had a slower start this year, right? And the numbers haven't been these eye-popping 40 home run seasons, and he's taken advantage of really pulling the ball in the air at home to get to a lot of his power. But I just think that if you're going to invest money in a player who has a chance to bring intangibles that change the expectations and the culture of an organization, I don't think that there's anybody quite like Alex Bregman on that free agent market. I don't think Soto does that. I think Soto's a better offensive player for sure, and he's going to be the most sought after free agent, and I wouldn't hesitate giving him the money if I had it to be able to sign him, to put him in the middle of my lineup. But I think of those 3 names you mentioned, I would do whatever it took to get Alex Bregman. I would not be surprised if AJ Hinch feels the same way. I just think that he is really, you've got stars and you have winning ball players, and sometimes I don't want to say it's rare, but it doesn't happen all the time where those 2 things overlap. And to me, it does with Bregman. I just think I think he is, as much for his production, what he means in terms of preparation, clubhouse, edge, commitment to winning. I felt that way about him when he was a freshman at LSU. I feel that way about him now. I would back up the Brinks truck for him. I think he'd be a sensational fit with the Tigers.
That's great to hear. All right, Mike, that's all we have for you, but thank you for breaking down the World Series and sharing your thoughts on the Tigers. It's always great to have you on the podcast, and we're really thankful for your time. We're going to have to do this again as we get closer to spring training, maybe with Alex Bregman on the Tigers roster. We'll see.
Well, Jose Altuve is campaigning to keep him in Houston.
I know.
So there's going to be plenty of teams that are interested. But no, it's great to be back with you guys, and looking forward to getting back to LA this weekend for the start of the World Series.
Yeah. Thanks again.
Thanks, Mike.
Everyone, that was Mike Ferrin, co-host of Power Alley on MLB Network Radio, an incredibly smart baseball mind and one of the best human beings in the game. We're going to talk more about Christian Walker, Alex Bregman, and Anthony Santander, but first, let's take a break.
I can't tell you how much we love talking to Mike Ferrin. I don't know anybody that can recall facts, recall the nuance of every season, recall the nuance of 7 seasons ago, and bring the level of insight that Mike Ferrin does. I guess that's why he's the best in the business and talks it for 3 hours every day. That was a pretty amazing interview with Ferrin. All right. So now it's our turn, and I know you have a question you want to ask before we get out of here. So share with us what your thoughts are and what your question is.
It's the same question we asked Mike Ferrin. If you had to pick one of these three players for the Tigers in free agency, who would you pick? Christian Walker, Alex Bregman, Anthony Santander. And no, you can't have them all as much as you would love to have them all. Jotted down some quick notes. Anthony Santander plays right field. He's 30 years old. Over the last 3 seasons, a 125 OPS plus, 460 games for an average of 153 games per season, an 8.5% walk rate, a 20.5% strikeout rate. He's a switch hitter. He's a below average to bad defender in right field. He's also going to DH for you about 15% of the time. You have first baseman Christian Walker, age 33. Over the last 3 seasons, a 123 OPS. He's played 447 games for an average of 149 games. He has a 9.9% walk rate and a 20.8% strikeout rate. And then you have Alex Bregman, a third baseman, age 30. Over the last 3 seasons, a 124 OPS plus, has played 461 games for an average of 154 games. He has an 11.1% walk rate and a 12.4% strikeout rate. For Christian Walker at first base, it's above average to great defense. Only 15 DH games in the last 3 seasons and 0 in 2024. He's getting older, though. He had a left oblique strain this season and missed a month. As for Alex Bregman, it's above average defense at third base. He's a 2-time World Series champ. He's played 99 playoff games, and he is an undisputed leader in the clubhouse. After rattling off all that, Mark, I want to know, who's your pick? Christian Walker, Alex Bregman, or Anthony Santander?
Well, prior to discussing this with Ferrin, I was leaning towards Christian Walker.
Me too.
But listening to what Mike had to say, and then looking at the fact that Bregman plays 150 games a year, he's got 14 WAR in the last 3 years, while everyone was whining about how terribly he started the season, he still finished with 4.1 WAR in 2024. And the level of notoriety he is now getting for being a culture clubhouse changer in an already really good cultured clubhouse, I got to think no matter how much money they need to spend on it, that Alex Bregman is by far the best choice for what they need, both in the clubhouse, on the field, the defense, the bat, just the entire premise of what will take the Tigers to the next level, which is really the consistency of how they played in the last 50 games plus the playoffs.
And he might come at a discount too. Let's not forget, like, he's gotten knocked for the way he started the season. And when you look at his season as a whole, Mark, it's the lowest OPS of his career that he's had. It's the lowest OPS plus of his career that he's had. Like, but it's not by much, but it's still the lowest of his career. Like, if he would have gone out and if he would have hit 41 home runs like he did back in 2019, I think we're having a much different conversation about the likelihood of the Tigers signing Alex Bregman. If he would have hit 51 home runs, it's a different conversation. If he would have had a 900 OPS, it's a different conversation. But this season, he had a 768 OPS, and a lot of that was because of the slow start. I get it, but that's a lot different than having an 800 OPS last season or an 820 OPS in 2022. He had technically what was considered a down year for Alex Bregman on offense, and I think that could benefit the Tigers as well. So I don't know, man. When I heard Mike Ferrin talk about Alex Bregman, and I've heard that before, AJ Hinch has talked about that, in side sessions after we do our media session pregame. We've talked about players on the Astros and we've talked about players around the league, and a lot of praise for Alex Bregman and what he brings. I've heard that from not only AJ Hinch, but we've also heard that when we had Chandler Rome, the Houston Astros beat writer, on the podcast. Like, we've heard that time and time again from different people. And then you have Mike Ferrin, who says it with such conviction. And I'm ready to hand over the check myself. Like, find me Chris Ilitch's checkbook and I'll rip out a page and I'll hand it to Alex Bregman and have him sign it, because it just seems too good to be true. And the relationship with AJ Hinch is there. That's going to factor in. It feels like the perfect storm. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself because, again, before talking to Mike Ferrin, I was on board with sign Christian Walker to play first base, platoon Jace Young and Matt Vierling at third base and kind of see what happens. And if you need to go find a third baseman at the trade deadline, do it then. But hearing Mike Ferrin, I'm all aboard the Alex Bregman train again, which I brought up a long, long time ago. Let's not forget. I brought that up a long time ago, last offseason, actually, as something that I was looking for. And I got a little bit cold on that topic, and now I might be heating back up on the Breggy train.
Well, all I can say is he was a 134 WRC plus post All-Star break. He is pretty damn good. I would say he comes to the top of the list, and it doesn't, if you do that, it doesn't negate the idea you could go try to find another right-hand bat to DH play first base, or heck, you could play Andy Ibanez more doing that too. But
Mark, really quick, let's not forget Detroit Free Press, January 3rd, 2024, the very beginning of the new year. I wrote 3 New Year's resolutions for the Tigers in the year of 2024, the calendar year. And my number 1 for New Year's resolution was open the checkbook and sign Alex Bregman at the winter meetings. So we'll see in December if the Tigers get it done and follow my resolution for them.
Yeah, we're going to talk a heck of a lot more about this. And, obviously payroll is going to have to go up. You got to have a payroll of $115 to $130 million after a season like this. And you're going to put a lot of people in the seats next year. And if you don't, I really think people are going to start yelling and screaming about Chris Ilitch an awful lot.
Hey, another thing too, Mark, by the way, my second New Year's resolution was let Jackson Jobe pitch in Detroit in 2024. And then the third New Year's resolution was stockpile replacement options for Javier Baez at shortstop. That was obviously before the MLB draft, where the Tigers selected a young prep shortstop and then went out and traded for Trey Sweeney, another shortstop as well. So the Tigers have cashed in on 2 of those 3 New Year's resolutions so far. We'll see if they get Bregman.
So far, so good. Some pretty damn good predictions. We're going to talk a lot more in the coming weeks about what we think might happen. We'll have our usual great guests. We'll see what we can dig up on that side. It's always much easier and more fun to have a bunch of people everyone loves in the off season. But it's time for us to get out of here, Evan Petzold. So I'd like to remind everybody to rate, share, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube. You can always find us, of course, embedded in every Evan Petzold article at thefreep.com. And there's an Evan Petzold article today in The Freep. So you probably find us there. I'd like to thank our editor, Nicole Avery Nichols, our producer, the man, Robin Chan, who's got his work cut out for him this week, to say the least. Love to my grandson and my son. And I'd like to thank them for all the fun we had in the last week. Shout out to future food critic, wife of Evan Petzold, Savannah Petzold, who is going to come on in the next week or two and talk to us about what great places she ate in Greece, because we got to have her on. It's the off season on top of it. So till next week, I hope everybody loves watching the World Series. Peace.